Hello and welcome to another episode of Hyperpolyglot interviews at HYPIA. I'm the president, Dr. Usman Chohan, and today I have the unique pleasure of having a wonderful guest. Just reconnecting like this puts a smile on my face. It's one of HYPIA's oldest members. We happen to be family, coincidentally, Ibrahim Chohan. And this interview, I estimate, will be a very lighthearted one for the audience. So you might hear us giggle and laugh. It's all in the spirit of polyglotism. So I extend a warm welcome to Ibrahim Chohan. Ibrahim, thank you for being on this uh, interview from Montreal. I know there's a
Thank you for
9 hour
having me.
time distance between us, time difference between us, 9 hours.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for having me. It's hard not to smile and laugh when you're talking to someone you're so close to. I just feel like laughing.
Yeah. Uh, this is a very funny example of this. There is two brothers, Andrew Cuomo and something Cuomo, Chris Cuomo, and one is on CNN, an anchor. The other is the governor of New York. They're talking about coronavirus, but as they talk, they're making fun of each other. They're bringing their mother in. Okay, mom said this to you, and so on. Oh, yeah, well, mom thinks you're that. And so it was very important as therapy for people in America watching CNN to see that brotherly sort of tension and fun. Because they
Yeah.
were, really going after each other. Okay, Governor, why don't you? And you people at CNN. So this might be a little bit like that. So the purpose is to interview all our members, and it highlights the diversity of the organization. We're not all interpreters, we're not all diplomats, we're not all Fulbright scholars, but a lot of us are regular people. We all have interesting backgrounds, and I'm proud to say that we cover all the continents on Earth. We cover about 60 to 70 languages, possibly up to 100 if you go further down. So I'd ask you to tell us a bit about yourself, specifically the languages that you speak.
So, the languages that I speak, I don't speak as many as you, but I speak English, Urdu, Punjabi, French, and Spanish. So these are the five that I speak. And Pashto is beginner. I'm still learning from my
We'll
wife.
count that as more because otherwise you wouldn't qualify for HYPIA. So you're being a little bit humble. So Pashto through marriage, English through socialization, and we were born in New York City, as was I. Urdu is our mother tongue. What about the other?
Mm. So French, we used to live in France, so that's where I started speaking it more. Otherwise, we started speaking it in Malaysia, I think. We went to Alliance Française.
Right.
Um, but we really started picking it up in France. And for me, the biggest step in learning French was through video games because all my video games were in French. So that was the biggest help I had in learning French. It was better than any class. And like you said, I'm in Montreal. I'm working at National Bank, which is a Quebec-based bank. So we have to speak in French most of the time here as well. So that's how I learned French. And Spanish, I learned in Argentina when our parents were diplomats there. So when I visited for summer vacation, I decided to pick up Spanish and do an internship to help me practice my Spanish as well. And I've kept it going ever since.
And on the video games thing, I actually want to highlight this, but I know you're not a Fallout guy. I played Fallout 4. I played it with our father, so he was a spectator. And what I would do is I would change the language setting. So the interesting thing about Fallout 4 is that it has 100,000 lines of dialogue. 100,000 lines of dialogue. You can cover an entire human conversation spectrum in 100,000 lines of dialogue. So I did play it, and Abu watched it. Our father watched it in English, French, Spanish as well, and I did Portuguese as well. I could have done others, but the video game thing, we say it in a light thing, like, oh, I did video games for that. But it's actually one of the best mediums. First of all, it's very engaging. First of all, and
Mm.
then you simulate the dialogue, you connect with the characters. The plot lines tend to be quite compelling. Video games are a very important format for storytelling, very compelling. So I would encourage other HYPIA members as well as candidates to do the video game route and not laugh it off. I mean, movies and stuff, that's fine too, especially if it's your favorite movie, but video games should not be taken lightly.
Absolutely. Video games engage you in a way that's deeper than movies can because they put you in that situation. So if you're playing an action game and you have to understand what's happening in order to survive, you need to know the language.
This funny thing happened where I play Europe East and Europe West servers. Before you left Dota, we used to do a Europe West together. But what happened was there's a lot of Russians on Europe East and Europe West, and the guy took Zeus, and my name is Uzinator on Dota, and it sounds like Uzinator, like it sounds very Russian. And so the guy is messaging me during it's like a ganking stage. It's quite advanced in the game, and the guy's like in Russian, he's texting me Uzinator, ты русский, like yeah, you're Russian. And without really thinking about it, because I was trying to buy some items, oh yeah, it's Pakistan. I was answering him with Latin text, but I was actually answering him in Russian in the back of my mind. I was like, oh, and so then he's asking in Russian, do you want to do the next game as well? Because it was a lucky game. I had gotten some early kills. And so sometimes in the back of your mind, Dota type situations, you then just think of and you're like, wow, that guy just, Russian, that kind of thing. It happened like 3 days ago.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Uh, I improved my Spanish the most while playing Dota because I would play in Latin American rooms, and you
Mm-hmm.
would speak to people from all over Latin America, and they have their own dialects. And I was introduced to swearing in different dialects, but also just the slang of different dialects. So I would ask them, what does this mean? What does that mean? And that was a way to learn different aspects of Spanish.
And when you live there in Canada, sure, you won't forget your Urdu or your Punjabi, for example, your ethnic and your mother tongues, but do you make any effort to keep it alive? Do you engage with the media or the entertainment sector from Pakistan?
Uh, we do watch a lot of Pakistani TV. It's funny. My Punjabi really improved in Canada more than anywhere else. In Pakistan, I rarely spoke Punjabi. It was here because a lot of the South Asian diaspora is Punjabi speaking. So I actually learned Punjabi more from them. But we do keep in touch with Pakistani media, Pakistani entertainment to just keep the Urdu sound in the house, especially with the 3-year-old that I have. We're trying to teach him Urdu because all the educational content is usually in English. So we're trying to find educational content in Urdu. We try to keep watching Urdu dramas, for example, just to have more Urdu in the house.
How about the Punjabi and the Pashto? Do you think he's ready for that, or that should come at a later stage in his pedagogy?
Right now we're just focusing on Urdu. We don't watch a lot of Punjabi content. It's mainly due to availability. We watch some Pashto entertainment from time to time, but again, availability um, makes it harder.
This is funny, but your grandfather, paternal grandfather, learned Punjabi in university. Your father learned Punjabi in university. Your mother learned it in university. Your brother, yours truly, learned it in university, and you learned it in university. And there's something about this in linguistics. They talk about the arcolect, the mesolect, and so on, the sort of status that is accorded to languages. And in Pakistan, at least within a certain socioeconomic stratum, which has a disproportionate control and influence over the public sphere, Urdu is preferred and it's almost considered vulgar. So if you don't go down to more intimate conversations or different social strata, you will talk to them in Punjabi as your first go-to thing, assuming you're in Punjab. And you would really consider Urdu to be the proper thing. And if somebody started just speaking to you in an ethnic language, you'd be, excuse me, I don't know who you are, but it would back up. These type of dynamics are very, very, very interesting. They have been reinforced as we've been less protected, as in we've become more adults and engaged with the public sphere independently. Then okay, so university they do this, but the funny thing, it has happened intergenerationally. So in the
Mm.
1940s university or the 1970s university also had the same thing.
That is interesting. Yeah,
Now, one thing that I had was to tell that HYPIA has 100 members plus. It's growing. Now, we've got a lot of diversity that you wouldn't.
that's
So
great
it's
news.
70 to 30 ratio guys to girls. That's unfortunate. I do encourage female application. I think one of the differences is that women don't apply because they aren't confident enough in expressing fluency. So, well, I don't really know how to say that. So, and then they just back off. But guys tend to be like, well, I could guess it's fluent, and so they go for it. I think that's one explanatory factor. But there was a book called Babel No More, and it did notice a disproportionate amount of the hyperpolyglots do tend to be male. This is one interesting thing. I don't want that necessarily to be the case. I want it to be on the merit of the applicant, but
Mm.
there's a 70-30 ratio. As I said, it covers all continents. It also covers, interestingly, age groups. So the oldest, I would say, was an African American gentleman. He's 65 plus, but there's also an
Oh wow.
Uruguayan gentleman in his late 50s, Fabio De Calci. There is a Jewish gentleman from the United States who is also past 60 for sure. With the cat, I'm not so impolite or importunist to ask his age, but he is old. And then the youngest was this young Greek kid who was 16 when he joined, obviously older now. And then there's
Wow.
Joe Farah, who's also from Montreal. If you remember, I used to take courses at the YMCA for Chinese and Japanese before I moved to China and Japan.
Right.
He used to be in my Japanese class, and he was younger than I was. So I was in my mid-20s back in those days. He was in his late teens. So he would be, and he's a high PM member too. He's on the younger side. So imagine an organization that stretches from 16 to 66 kind of things.
That's amazing.
Um, in terms of achievement, there are some exceptional people. Some people who have learned this for humanitarian reasons. There's a woman from Poland, Julia Haremska, and she learned these Middle Eastern languages to engage with the refugee crisis. This was big in 2017, if you recall. Yeah, and some other people have done it for humanitarian reasons. Some people do it for kicks. It's fun. It's kind of cool. Our director of recruitment, Matthias Barmat, is Argentinian, and I see that reflected in a lot of new recruits because what we have is a large representation from Latin America. Now, Brazil has a lot of racial diversity, but doesn't particularly have linguistic diversity at the surface. Then they have many indigenous languages. Then they have many subcultures. A lot of that is being reflected in HYPIA. So depending on who
Mm.
comes and who they bring along, you do see different movements within HYPIA. And I'm speaking of a microcosm of 100 people only. So it's easy to do percentages, you just count how many they are. But it does reflect a lot of humanity for just 100 people.
That's very interesting to watch the demographics of this group, and I'm very happy to hear that it's growing so much. That makes me very happy.
Now, as far as different environments in which you had to live and grow up, some places have been more heterogeneous than others. For example, you've lived in a city like New York, but you were too young. Paris, which is quite diverse. Montreal is very diverse. But then there's some that are a bit more homogenous. Buenos Aires, for example, right, at the surface. So was this something that you noticed growing up, that this place is diverse? Is it a plus or is it not? How would you weigh that as a factor where you live?
Uh, diver. So if we're talking about from the perspective of as a plus, and I interpret that as, are they more accepting of people who are different or not? It's funny. So when I was in Buenos Aires, even though it's not as diverse as, let's say, Montreal racially, but I think they were more curious and accepting in general.
Right.
A place like France was the opposite. It's very diverse, but it didn't feel as accepting. So there are other places where uh, I would say Toronto, which I think is more tolerant or accepting than Montreal, which is in a province like Quebec. So I don't think there's a direct relationship between diversity of the population and how tolerant they are. I think that's related more with the mindset or the history of the people with different diasporas. So um, you have to look at each city or each population in its own context.
Very true. You'd be interested to hear this. I think it was the Washington Post that covered this maybe 7, 8 years ago. It's a bit old now. But the survey question was, if you're looking at tolerance, how would you feel if your neighbor next door was of a different background? And obviously, your usual suspects, Canada, United States, scored very high, that they would be accepting that there's a neighbor next door who's different from them. But if you looked at Asia, so the old world countries, right, Africa, Asia, and so on, one thing that stood out in this region, so between the Middle East going to the Far East, was actually Pakistan. The accepting ones are blue colored, and the least accepting ones, according to the survey, were red. And Pakistan was this dark blue. Like, it's okay for me that it's different. And around it were red. I think you see the repercussions of this, for example, the politics in India, there's pogroms and massacres and all that happening, and right. But here, that never seems to be like an election issue, right? Nothing above local politics. So, but that doesn't mean that there's too many foreigners here, for example. They're not. Yeah, there's a large Chinese community that's growing and so on, but here, and yet people would be curious, and foreigners have in their YouTube videos, traveloguers, and people I've met say that, yeah, people here were genuinely curious and well-wishing towards foreigners. So I think that corroborates what you're saying about the fact that, yeah, they might be different, but actually, are they really accepting? Well, it's not clear.
Yeah, and also just to add to your point, Pakistan is very diverse. Um, we've grown up there, and our friends were very different backgrounds. They spoke different languages at home. So, but you would not really see them as different. You already knew they were different, but you were all Pakistanis. So I think that's what makes us more accepting, because we are very diverse, especially in a city like Islamabad where we grew up. People were from all over Pakistan. They spoke different languages at home. They had different cultures, but you would be very accepting. You wouldn't even think of them as different.
It's a good point. Just to add to that linguistic diversity part, because that's important to HYPIA, there's also the class diversity, which I thought was very interesting. Growing up, you and I went through the tyranny of a military school, a naval school, batting college, and it was quite a shock, no matter how you put it. And post facto, I've talked to people who are alumni who are my age, who are now in their 30s, as you are, and they're very different, very much reflective of how their parents may have been before they were in the Navy, kind of thing. But what happened in the Navy school that I look back and I think is very positive is the uniform and the culture and the disciplinary. And so it was a tyranny pushed down on all of us, and we were all equal. But if you noticed carefully the way some people spoke and what backgrounds they came from, some people came from very remote areas or very this, that. But the uniform and the tyranny that was uniform, so uniform is enclosed, but the uniformity of the tyranny from put us all on the same footing. So it really erased class differences or these differences that would then be reproduced as we became adults and in the public sphere. Some of those people you can't even talk to anymore because they're so up or down in that stratum. But in that environment, it really got down, and we were all unified against a common enemy, kind of thing. These kinds of microcosms do help with this shaping you and your interaction with the public sphere. What do you think?
That's very true. I remember while you were talking, I just had a flashback. I remember this one kid was crying, and he was crying and he was saying something in a language I didn't understand. I didn't even know what language that was. I have no idea what the words were. But like you said, you didn't. Maybe it was also related to the age we were in. Like I must have been 5, but you didn't notice that he was speaking a different language. You were just thinking, "Oh, this person, he has some issue, whatever that is." So the language he spoke, just if he looked different, it was not of consequence. But it's funny you said that. It reminded me of that moment.
In this case, though, we have to look at how much of communication is really the spoken word. There are different studies give you different numbers, but it's between 80, or I won't say between, but it's 80 and up percentage of
Mm.
communication is the body language. So if you are five and there's a kid who's like, it's the body language that gives it away that there's something wrong. And, oh, I get about 80% of what's happening. Need to help
That's true.
them.
That's true.
The degree of communication that's actually not spoken word. And that's why you, mashallah, have thrived in every country you've gone to. And a lot of that
Thank
is
you
the
so
test
much.
of like the context. This person seems dangerous. This person seems very nice. This, that, that kind of thing. A lot of it is inference.
Yeah.
How has the bilingual culture at the National Bank of Canada panned out for you? I'm asking because in my case, NatCan Investment Management, which used to be a branch of the National Bank, but kind of independent, was actually very much English, but it depended on what team you were working in. International Equities was obviously English, but many other teams were French. My suspicion is that for you, there's a lot more French than it was for me.
It depends, as you said, on which team you're in. You'll see demographics change across teams even. Depends on who your VP might be, and that kind of you see that trickle down to some extent. So before I used to be in risk management, in risk quantification, and that was a very anglophone team. Often because they had to hire people that had very uh, advanced quantitative qualifications, and that kind of uh, knowledge perhaps is very hard to find in Quebec, so they would have to find it from outside. Or so that would be a more anglophone team. But now, for example, I'm in financial markets IT as a business analyst, and here, because we have to talk to business teams, and some business teams have to deal with French speaking clients, so that's why our work becomes in French. So it really depends, like you said, what that team is doing.
And in addition to your career at the National Bank, this is the funny thing, by the way. You and I are different people, temperament and all, but we have very similar resumes. So your undergrad is in Ontario, my undergrad is in Ontario. You work at the National
Right.
Bank, I worked at the National Bank. I did my MBA from McGill, and congratulations, you just finished your MBA at McGill. So if you look at that, you're like,
Thank
it's
you.
probably the same guy. That's
Same
actually
last name.
same last name. That I just got this
Surprise.
guy trying to pull a fast one, send two resumes,
Some
double.
fraud.
In McGill, where you just finished your degree, I had a very positive experience. For me, I was full time. You were part time. There are advantages of either. And so there were 60 kids from 32 countries. I remember. So this diversity. We're talking like 10 years ago. Oh, sorry, it's now 8 years ago when I started at MBA. And it was very positive in terms of diversity. It was a very funny moment, for example, where we had our Japan trip, which is customary. You also went to Japan, and I have a very good friend who's from Burkina Faso. And the guy was a Quebecois who was trying to give us some cultural training before going to Japan. He's like, don't worry, it's not like you're going to Burkina Faso. And the guy from Burkina Faso
What's wrong with Burkina?
and the guy didn't realize that, and so he said, "Oh man, I'm sorry, I just said that. I don't know what I was saying."
So much for his cultural sensitivity talk.
Much for the cultural sensitivity. Don't worry, it's Japan. You're not going to Burkina Faso or whatever. And then the guy from Burkina Faso. And so what I'm trying to get segue into is, how is your experience of diversity at McGill been?
McGill is a very diverse place. Because I was part time, the people that I interacted with were mostly part time students as well. And we were only a batch of 13. So you would see the same people, but it was a very diverse bunch as a whole, including the full times. Part time MBA students were people who live in Montreal, have been living in Montreal, have been working in Montreal. So you wouldn't see that big a level of diversity. Um, I, I mean, apart from racial diversity, there wasn't even much diversity in the occupations we had. I think most of the people there were engineers as well.
Right.
So in part time, it's harder to find diversity.
So since our resumes are identical, does this mean you're going to pursue a PhD next? Is that on the cards?
I would love to be a Dr. Chohan, just like you, but I haven't decided yet. Um, I don't think I'll be doing it anytime soon. I'd like to take a little break right now and enjoy not studying for a bit.
Yeah, and PhD is not a particularly easy enterprise either. I had a good time, I did it, but it wasn't an easy thing. I follow a lot of meme pages on Facebook about PhDs, and the humor never ends because it's so depressing. It's so difficult. One
And it's
statistic
very
says
long.
it's very long, 4 to 7 years. Mine happened to be in two, and everything was published. Then I had to just wait a third year to get the degree. It's not, you know. So, but in terms of COVID-19, we're talking in a COVID-19 context. People looking back at this video won't know what that is or care, but COVID-19 context means there's quarantine and self-isolation. And all the PhD people who I know who have done a PhD, they're like, whatever, I've been through this before because there's no better preparation for quarantine and self-isolation than doing a fucking PhD. And that's particularly when everyone else is having fun and you're the one in lockdown. There's a lot of advantages to this that you didn't see coming, but the fact that I had my doctoral work, I had degree awarded in 2018 and now it's 2020, I'm like, what? I just did this isolation, no big deal. So there are some
You had the training.
uh, it's not for everyone. The OECD statistics say that for OECD countries, including Canada, it's 2%. Of the population has a PhD. That means they've done it before or something, and over time it's 2%.
Mm,
There's one or two exceptions, countries, Switzerland, 4%. It's a small country. And the US, because they have
mm,
monopolized academia since World War II. I mean, most of the top universities 30 years ago were American. Now it's changing, of course, but it was
mm,
like 3% or something. I don't remember exactly, but otherwise it's 1 to 2% only. It's not for everyone. I mean, it is demanding. But in
yeah.
Hypia, for example, there are others who do have doctoral work in linguistics. That's pretty cool. And Hypia has
Oh
received
wow.
about 15 to 20, I would say, applications for using us as a data set, whether it's in
Oh
neurology,
wow.
linguistics. But the policy at Hypia is to respect the privacy and not to compel members to then be forced to fill out surveys or anything. There's an ethics question with that
Mm,
too. The
of
preference
course.
has always been towards privacy. And the fact that we're doing this video series now is a break from tradition as well. First of all, it's a good opportunity to use Zoom to get in touch with everybody, but it's also to then grow the profile of Hypia in the sense that people out there who are interested should have more than just text. I mean, text is very dissuasive in the 21st century. People just don't read as much
Mm,
as you would imagine 100 years ago. They would simply go through text. They just don't. They want videos. This
mm.
content is being created in that context as well. But we haven't shared our data set, like who we are. But it would be interesting to see what are the political affiliations of 100 people who speak 10 languages. I mean, are they really as liberal as you think? Maybe not. That kind of thing. So there's a big connection between PhD type inquiries, not just you and me doing PhDs, and what Hypia offers as a rich, diverse set. Now, I've got my
Mm.
PhD in economics. I don't think I'd want to do another one in linguistics, but I certainly have a unique data set to work with.
Yeah, that's interesting.
What I wanted to ask was about raising a kid and imagining what diversity of languages would be like in a North American context. As you raise your son, do you think that he'd be speaking 6+ languages?
Inshallah, I hope he would be speaking at least 4 languages. But it's not as easy as it sounds. I used to think, you just immerse the child into that environment where people are speaking different languages, and then he'll just learn whatever he listens to. But it's not quite like that. They do have personalities. They do have preferences. So because a lot of the media that we consume and a lot of the educational content is in English, he has a preference for English. He doesn't really speak French. He'll understand what's happening. He'll understand what the daycare provider is saying or what she wants from him, but he will not respond to her in French. Even Urdu, we're having a hard time convincing him to speak Urdu uh, because it's just a matter of preference. Um, so I hope he does get over that. In the end, as a child, I guess it depends on who you like and what language do they speak. What are they doing? And we're parents, so we're not that cool for him.
Yeah,
But
figures of authority. Yes.
yeah, exactly. So hopefully he doesn't think Urdu is a language for Tirana's parents. But
You had a similar experience,
yeah,
this tyrannical experience with Urdu, because you had moved to Pakistan and it was part of your curriculum and it was part of the tyranny. And yet now looking back, it's not a big deal per se. So if there are any scars, they're minor. And you also had Farsi as your first language you spoke, but you can't recall it, can you?
no, I can't. I tried to speak Farsi with an Iranian colleague of mine, but I just don't remember enough to say anything. So sometimes I just stare blankly at him, trying to think of something to say, and then I might Google Translate it and cheat a bit.
It's ironic
But
because the effort that it would take you or me to pick up Farsi again, relearn it, is very little. I had a funny experience. This is not Farsi per se, it's actually Turkish, but I went to Istanbul recently before COVID. And the guy, so I was having a nice dinner and I wanted the bills. I was like, bill, addition, no. And I was like, what could I know that is Turkish that he would bring the bill? And I just used Urdu and I said, hisab. He's like, oh, hisab, sure, hisab. Hisab is their word for the bill. Hisab. Hisab. So, and this is
that's
same in
amazing.
Arabic, same in Farsi. So you know more Farsi than you realize, even if you don't know any Farsi at all, because of the sisterly relationship between Urdu and Farsi. They're sisters.
That's so strange, and that's part of the advantage of knowing many different languages. You can communicate with people at a level that is very different, and most people appreciate that effort. Um, I had an Iranian friend uh, who I was studying Spanish with, and we started beginner Spanish together. And he had a Spanish to Farsi dictionary, and it was this thick. It was this huge book, and he would bring it to class every time. And I asked him if I could look at it, and I can read the text because it's the same script as Urdu,
Sleek, yes.
and I would go through his dictionary and I'm like, I know what that means. And then I'd look at the Spanish translation. I'd be like, yep, that's what I thought. There was this one word, and after this, I'll tell you a joke. Hopefully, it's appropriate for this video.
Everything goes. Everything goes. This is a casual to discussion.
Perfect. So, there was this word called dil dil. He said dil tangi, and I was like, oh, dil tangi. Okay, dil I know is heart. Tangi I know is like irritation. So dil tangi is probably like an agitated heart. And he was like, wow, how did you know? And then I read the Spanish meaning and I was like, yep, that's exactly what I thought. I'm like, because in Urdu, it's the same thing. And we started sharing different words. Do you have this in Urdu? Do you have this in Farsi? And one of the words that came up was gusht. And he said, do you have the word gusht? And I'm like,
I
yes, yes, we do. But well, why do you ask? And he's like, like walking, patrolling. And I started laughing. I'm like, I guess that's one way to look at it.
yeah.
And
A streetwalker. A streetwalker. Streetwalker.
exactly. And he said it's referring to usually a policeman or a policewoman
Yeah.
who's
A cop
walking
on the
around
beat.
patrolling the streets.
Hmm.
Exactly, a cop on the beat. And I was like, well, in Urdu, it's not a cop that's on the beat. And then I explained what it was, and we just started laughing. We couldn't control ourselves. It's really funny. And since you
Phenomenal.
mentioned Turkey,
Yes, go ahead.
uh, we've been watching a show, a Turkish show, and we've put English subtitles to watch it. It's a show called Ertugrul Ghazi, and we were really surprised to see how many Turkish words or how many Urdu words are the same as Turkish, since we take roots from Turkish. And it was really surprising. So,
From Turkic.
sorry?
We take it from Turkic, as in we
Turkic.
take it from Central Asian languages, including Turkish. So Babur came from
Okay.
Samarkand, right? The Fergana
Mm,
Valley. Yeah. Go ahead.
right. No, so I was just saying there were a lot of words that were very similar, and every time we hear a word that sounds like a word from Urdu, we flag it. So, like, one of the words that I was surprised and I used to wonder about was the word lakin.
Yes.
And they say lakin. And I was very surprised and happy at the same time. So now I'm always listening for what words sound the same in Urdu.
Oh, there's so many. Hava, the air, the wind. Hava.
Hava? Oh, okay.
Yeah. So Hava Chilik is like their airlines or something. Bagh, garden, right? That's a big one. Everybody has a bagh. Um,
Yeah, intikam.
well, so yeah, that's a bigger one. But even like Tamra, let's give this guy a fucking medal.
Okay.
Tamra. But Tamra used to be the standard bearer. Like Genghis Khan had a standard bearer, standard,
Okay.
before the standard, and Tamra with that. But it was like a spirit bearer, so like you can't profane it. So if you died, God
Mm.
forbid, and your wife took your standard and put it in front of your enemies, they'd be like, "Oh God, we're gonna get from Tamra, then from banner to this to badge to medal." And this process is called semantic drift. The same with
Mm.
gush, street walker, but the semantics of that word have changed to a different kind of street walker. Semantic drift occurs a lot because, in fact, Urdu is a closer language to Old Persian than Modern Persian because Modern Persian has had semantic drift. So, for
Sure.
example, Daulat is wealth, but and it's also government, like Bank Daulat in Pakistan kind of thing. But in Iran, it has one of the modern meaning and not the older meaning. Just can't remember which one, but
Mm.
wealth versus government, they have the modern meaning, we have the old meaning, that kind of. Oh yeah.
Right. Right. That's very interesting. It's always fun to have these discussions with people who speak other languages. This semantic drift that you mentioned, I used to talk about different words in Urdu and see if they exist in Arabic as well with some of my Arab friends. And they would always say, that's a very old word.
Yeah.
That's what it used to mean.
Yeah. So there must have been
It's very
something like
interesting.
that. That's because Urdu was the official language of the subcontinent, and in sense of official meaning official
Mm.
dumb, as in official documents, as in writing, so it's fixed in time versus the
Mm.
spoken. So Farsi spoken on the street will move, it will shift, but documentation stays consistent. That's why languages that are put into writing tend to maintain more stasis, as opposed
Right.
to those that are always spoken and they can go haywire, they can go this way, that way, it's fine. Even written
Sure.
languages can change, but that's due to cultural shift, new demographics, interchange with another culture, etc.
Right.
Technological shift. So texting is a totally different lexicon than before. But if it's written, it's likely to stay. Now, here's something cool that you may not have come across on our website, but the rare language specialist is another branch of HYPIA. So you don't just have to be a hyperpolyglot like you are or other people who speak multiple languages. You can just specialize in one language, but it's a dead or dying language. Nobody knows a dead language, but a dying language or a moribund language. And you specialize in one of them, you can become a member of HYPIA as a rare language specialist. So we found, for
Oh,
example,
cool.
a guy who speaks Quiche, and Quiche was what the Mayans used to speak. It's a Mayan tribe, and it's in Guatemala. We've got a guy for that. There's a global shaper from Australia who speaks two, like Kikune Jajara is the name of the language. I can't say it right, but Kikune Jajara is an Aboriginal language. So working with the indigenous communities in South Australia, he picked up two. Uh,
Wow.
and one of our relatives, your sister-in-law, Hamza's wife, Zinia, speaks Burusho. She's from the Burushaski tribe in northern Pakistan. And this language is an isolate root, so it does not have any connection to any Indo-European language or Sino-Tibetan language or Altaic language, Altaic being from Turkey till Korea, including your Irtugrul and all
Mm.
that. None of these families. It's totally isolated, and it survived because it was in a mountainous climate, so it never had enough intercession from other languages. She's
Oh, wow, interesting.
so I had this chat with her in Lahore once. Hopefully, we'll get her on an interview too. But rare language specialist means, I mean, that's a very rare language. It's also an isolate language. And so this is one of my projects to get people from rare languages, dying languages, to then to give them that platform. That's another movement that's happening within HYPIA. Smaller, obviously, but still growing. It's very hard to find rare language speakers who are also digital,
Sure,
right?
because they're rare.
It's rare to find rare people. Very rare to find rare people. So one thing that I think is positive, but I want to know your view, is that I think the number of hyperpolyglots will grow with time. What do you think?
Absolutely, absolutely, absolutely. We're so connected to each other in so many different ways. It's not just trade anymore. It's through media, it's through entertainment. People travel so much. Hopefully, when COVID goes away, we'll be able to travel again.
That's right.
And even like we said, through video games, you could sit in your room here in Montreal, and you could be friends with someone in Tokyo and exchange views and exchange language with each other. So for sure, the number of hyperpolyglots and polyglots is going to grow, and so will the group that you founded. I'm sure it will grow as well.
You know, COVID-19 has been a big stimulus. It seems that people were spending more time sitting around, either brushing up on what they knew, or they were just browsing and they said, wow, this is association I'd like to apply. But I see a distinct jump in the statistics, much more people. So I wasn't anticipating hitting 100. And the reason is because we're not on the language circuit. There is that cult of people who are like, yeah, you speak 10, but I speak 11. And then there's a lot of this polyglot gathering and all this other stuff. There's a lot of showmanship. IPS is the opposite, and that's why it succeeded as a niche. It wasn't about me or you, it's about us. The promoting others rather than them going and bring something. So there's a lot of that venal, I would call it incel hatred among these polyglot associations are out there that, you know, I'm the better nerd. Okay, like I know more about the Skywalker than you do. Type of attitude, polyglotism. So I know a Klingon better than you know Klingon. Kind of approach to life. That visceral.
Does someone speak Klingon in this group?
I don't think so. But they can, because its grammar was constructed by the authors, right? I believe. I don't know. I believe that you can speak Klingon as a working language. But then the language is not about one person; it's about two people, right? So maybe if you know Klingon, how often would
Absolutely.
that would take you more into that incel mindset. So I do see that showmanship aspect in polyglot conferences. HYPIA is different because it's not about promoting me or you; it's about the group and inclusion. And so that's why I think it'll survive a class, not necessarily a cut above, but a class apart. That's where HYPIA belongs. That it's not about your showmanship and attitude.
It's a wonderful philosophy.
You will find.
Especially in.
Go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead, please.
I was going to say that you will find a million, 10 million videos of people saying, watch me speak 6 languages, watch me speak 10. As in the individual trying to reach out that, you know what, I am also awesome. And this is how I'm going to prove my awesomeness. But here, it won't be about me. I have a lot of depth in the language. You have depth in your language, but there are people with more breadth. Some people have a combination of breadth and depth. But developing it is not about the person, it's about the group. That's what I just wanted to add. Sorry, go ahead.
No, it's a beautiful message, and it's very important because, like you said, languages is not about one person; it's about two people or many people. The point of having a language is so that you can talk to each other, and it's only by giving this kind of empowerment to people who do speak languages that they'll want to communicate with each other more, be tolerant of each other, and learn more about each other. I can't imagine my life if I would have learned, that I would have wanted to learn many languages, but would have been intolerant. I don't think the two go together. You need to be tolerant towards other people. You need to be appreciative of other people's cultures and immerse yourself in it. It doesn't take away from you if you immerse in someone else's culture, or if you give appreciation to someone else's culture. It only makes you better. And I think learning languages teaches you that.
It's absolutely right. One example I want to share with you in this is those radio interviews. I don't know if you ever came across them, but on SBS Hindi, I used to go on there and we would talk about social issues in Australia. And the host, a wonderful guy, he speaks very pure Hindi, and so the words he would use would be very, very Sanskritized because Hindi was taken from Urdu as a reactionary thing. They said this is too Muslim, so I need to just shove all the Sanskrit I can find, and that became Hindi. But Urdu was very Persianized, and all of the discussion we had before about his relationship to Turkic languages, Semitic languages, and Persian. So it was kind of a duel, but a positive duel, because he would be asking questions. And I'll give you an example. He would be like, ये जो विश्वविद्यालयों में चयन प्रक्रिया है, इसके सामाजिक परिणाम क्या है? So that's the reaction. You bet. How much Urdu is there? ये जो विश्वविद्यालयों है,
Nothing, just yeah.
इनमें जो चयन प्रक्रिया है, इसके सामाजिक परिणाम क्या है? So विश्वविद्यालयों is the university, so Darul Uloom in Urdu. इसमें जो चयन प्रक्रिया है, so गुफ्त शनीद, the conversation, the discussion. इसके सामाजिक, so मुआशी, social, सामाजिक. परिणाम, असरात, impact. Right? So what is the social impact of the discussions happening in the universities? ये जो विश्वविद्यालयों में चयन प्रक्रिया जो हो रही है, इसकी सामाजिक परिणाम क्या है? So that is, and this duel was so entertaining for people who are from Hindustan, from Pakistan, because they would associate with both and see that there is two different personalities to these languages. And that was my eye opener in this, because, you know, you get that kind of racist thing where those languages over there are kind of all the same. But at this level, it's really something different. And the point that you made is that you can't be multilingual and intolerant. So when I was appreciating Hindi at that level, I said, yeah, that's a nice language. It's just different, but it's nice, and I want to appreciate it in its own right. That's kind of cool.
That's a wonderful story, and it really points out the differences. You're right that a lot of people look at it as the same, and they take Bollywood as a benchmark, which is which is confusing to me. But what you've pointed out is very interesting, and it's a very interesting story. There are differences coming from history, and we have to appreciate the differences
In a tolerant manner. I know you're a busy guy. You were as recently you were a student, an employee, and a family man. You've gotten the student part out, but you're still an employee and a family man. So I appreciate that, despite the time zone difference and this, that you took the time for this lovely conversation. For people who have made it this far in the conversation, you should anticipate more videos. There are, just like Ibrahim, other interesting members of HYPIA that together make an interesting collective. So if this was a sample of 100 people, I would want this 100 people to be the last 100 people on Earth, and it would be a glorious place. Thank you for your time, Ibrahim.
Thank you so much for having me.
And we'll stay in touch, of course. Thank you, everybody.